The tanks had made it halfway across when the bridge began to shake. Below, Lieutenant A.C.G. Jones ran through smoke and rain. Sniper rounds cracked off the girders. He dropped to one knee, wire cutters flashing. The first cable bit apart in a burst of sparks, the air thick with copper and ozone. "Forward," he shouted, waving his sappers ahead. If the Germans blew this bridge, the entire Allied advance would drown here in the river with them. Another cable gave way. From the far bank came the faint cheer of paratroopers. One more cable, maybe two, and they'd have it. Then, in the shadow of a nearby bunker, a German officer lowered his binoculars and smiled. The Americans had taken the bait. "Jetzt," he said. "Now." In September 1944, the Allied war machine, having shattered the German army in Normandy, was now fanning out across France and Belgium in a breathtaking advance. But victory had a cost. Supply lines were stretched to the breaking point. On the other side, the Wehrmacht was in a full-blown retreat, reeling and disorganized, but not yet broken. As they fell back toward the German frontier, their resistance stiffened. Allied commanders, eager to land a knockout blow before winter, devised a plan that was incredibly audacious: Operation Market Garden. It was a massive gamble, a thunderous armored thrust straight through Holland that would hook around the northern end of the Siegfried Line, seize a series of crucial bridges, and open a direct path into Germany's industrial heart. If it worked, the war could be over by Christmas. The linchpin of this plan was a 60-mile-long airborne carpet that would be laid down by 3 Allied airborne divisions. The farthest and most vital of these objectives was the bridge at Arnhem. Closer to the front, the American 82nd Airborne Division drew the assignment at the Dutch city of Nijmegen. Their task was to capture the 2 vital bridges spanning the 400-yard-wide Wall River, the Walbrug Road Bridge and the Spoorbrug Rail Bridge. The initial landings on September 17th had gone well, with the paratroopers, veterans of Sicily, Italy, and D-Day, securing key ground around the city. But a crucial error was made. Intimidated by faulty intelligence and focusing on their defensive perimeter, they failed to make a quick, decisive dash for the bridges. That hesitation was fatal. Allied intelligence had completely missed the presence of 2 elite SS Panzer divisions refitting in the area. What had been a flimsy defense of rear-echelon German troops and police battalions was, within hours, transformed into a formidable force of combat-hardened Waffen-SS Panzer Grenadiers. Kampfgruppe Henke defended the rail bridge. Kampfgruppe Euling fortified a park and an old fort covering the road bridge. Camouflaged anti-tank guns covered every major intersection. Nests of MG-42 machine guns, with their distinctive, terrifying ripping sound, created interlocking fields of fire. The Germans had wired the bridges for demolition, but held off, hoping to use them for their own counterattacks. The window for an easy capture had slammed shut. By the time the lead Sherman tanks of the British Guards Armoured Division linked up with the 82nd on September 19th, the battle for Nijmegen had become a street-by-street brawl. Lieutenant Colonel Ben van der Voort's paratroopers pushed into the city, supported by the British tanks roaring down narrow alleys, their cannons blasting German strongpoints. The paratroopers ignored their flanks, trusting the tankers to deal with any threats. They took the high ground, scrambling onto rooftops to create a battlefield above the cobblestone streets. It was organized chaos. Then the American paratroopers spread out, disappearing into the surrounding brick row houses. They smashed through interior walls, advancing from living room to living room, while British tankers skillfully maneuvered their Shermans through backyards and gardens to provide covering fire. But for every German position they overran, another seemed to take its place. As darkness fell on September 19th, the Allied attack had stalled just short of its objectives. With the southern approach to the bridges at a stalemate, the Allied commanders knew a change in tactics was essential. Brigadier General James Gavin, commander of the 82nd Airborne, met with the British generals, Brian Horrocks of XXX Corps, and Frederick Boy Browning, the overall airborne commander. Continuing the frontal assault would be a meat grinder, costing them men and, more importantly, time. Every hour of delay was another hour the British 1st Airborne Division, fighting for its life at the final bridge in Arnhem, went without relief. Gavin proposed a daring new plan. The surest way to take a bridge was to attack it from both ends at once. He would send a battalion of his paratroopers across the Wall River in a daylight amphibious assault. They would land on the north bank, downstream from the bridges, and attack the German defenses from the rear. As they did, the forces on the south bank would launch another all-out assault. It was a bold plan. The paratroopers had no boats and the Germans had cleared the river of any local craft. General Horrocks, however, had a solution. His engineers had 32 assault boats with them. He ordered them brought forward immediately, giving the trucks carrying them top priority on the single congested road that served as XXX Corps' lifeline. The boats were scheduled to arrive by 8 a.m. on September 20th, allowing for a morning assault, but the road was choked with traffic. The vital trucks were delayed for hours. The mission fell to Major Julian Cook's 3rd Battalion, 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment. While they waited, the plan was finalized. The 376th Parachute Field Artillery and all available British guns would unleash a 10-minute bombardment on the German positions on the far bank. And then for another 10 minutes, Royal Air Force Typhoon fighter bombers would strafe and bomb the enemy defenses. Following the air attack, artillery and mortars would fire a continuous barrage of smoke shells to screen the crossing. Tanks of the 2nd Irish Guards would add their fire and fill any gaps in the smokescreen. It wasn't until 2:30 p.m. that the trucks finally arrived. As one of them neared the riverbank, a German shell struck it, reducing the number of available boats to 26. As the paratroopers of 3x504 saw their vessels for the first time, the true danger of their mission became starkly apparent. They were Goatley boats, flimsy, collapsible craft made of canvas and wood. Weighing only 200 pounds, each was supposed to carry 13 paratroopers and 3 engineers to steer. The engineers scrambled to assemble them as the H-hour of 3 p.m. approached. Worse, most of the boats were missing their oars, and the weight of their weapons, ammunition, and gear meant that if their boat capsized or sank, they would go straight to the bottom. There would be no turning back. At 3 p.m., the Allied artillery erupted. A storm of high explosives slammed into the German positions on the north bank of the Waal. For 10 minutes, the ground shook. Then the Typhoons screamed in, their cannons spitting fire. As the planes pulled away, the artillery shifted to smoke. A thick, white wall billowed across the river, obscuring the far bank. Major Cook yelled, "Go!" His men surged forward, dragging the clumsy Goatley boats into the water and scrambling aboard. They pushed off into the current, frantically paddling with rifle butts. Captain Moffat Burris, commander of an I Company, had been waiting behind a levee all day. He later admitted, "Had we seen what we were expected to cross in daylight, we probably wouldn't have done it." The Germans knew the smokescreen meant an attack was coming. They opened fire into the white haze. Machine guns and 20mm flak cannons poured a torrent of steel into the river. The paratroopers could hear the rounds cracking over their heads and smacking into the water around them. Then a breeze began to thin the smoke. The small boats were fully exposed. The German gunners, now with clear targets, unleashed hell. The cannons were devastating. A single hit could tear a man in half. mortar bombs rained down. One scored a direct hit on a boat, vaporizing it and its occupants. The survivors, weighed down by their equipment, struggled in the water before sinking. The other boats could not stop to help. Generals Browning and Horrocks watched the carnage from the roof of a nearby power station. They saw boats ripped apart and whole craft drifting downstream with their occupants gunned down. It was a horrific spectacle, but the survivors never stopped. They paddled with helmets, with their bare hands, anything to reach the other side. Then they hit the shore. Of the 26 boats that started, only 13 made it across on the first wave. The engineers in those boats immediately pushed off, paddling back into the storm of fire to get the next wave. 11 of them made it back. On the north bank, the paratroopers spilled out of their boats, not with fear, but with a searing rage. It was time for payback. They charged the 800 yards of open ground toward the embankment where the German defenders were dug in. Captain Burris ordered his men to blanket the enemy positions with grenades. A volley of explosions ripped across the German lines. The paratroopers followed right behind the blasts, swarming over the dike and tearing into the defenders with bayonets and rifle butts. Within 30 minutes, the embankment was theirs. The northern anchor of the German defense had been shattered. With a foothold secured on the north bank, the enraged paratroopers wasted no time. While some men set up a defensive perimeter, Major Cook gathered a small group and immediately attacked east toward the bridges. They kept the pressure on, hitting the shocked German defenders before they could regroup. As more waves of the 3x504 made it across the river, they fanned out, joining the assault. Lieutenant James McGillis led a squad against the Hof van Holland, an old fort housing the flak guns that had decimated the crossing. They suppressed the guns with rifle fire, charging forward and hurling grenades. The main body of the assault force reached the Spoorbrug rail bridge. After a series of sharp, violent fights, they seized the northern end. They arrived just in time to see the German defenders, some 500 men, retreating across the bridge toward them from the southern end. They had realized their escape route was about to be cut. The paratroopers set up machine guns and swept the bridge. A German prisoner was sent out to call for their surrender. He was shot by his own side. The Americans opened fire again, cutting down the trapped soldiers. Many leaped from the bridge to the ground below. When the firing stopped, 267 German bodies were counted on the bridge. The crossing belonged to the Allies. On the bridge, a British engineer, Lieutenant A.C.G. Jones, ran from point to point, cutting demolition wires under heavy sniper fire. He was unaware that the main detonator switch was located in a bunker upstream where the German commander, General Heinz Harmel, watched as the British tanks poured across his bridge. As the Shermans reached the center span, he gave the order, "Blow it." Nothing happened. He tried the backup circuit, but still nothing. The bridge remained standing. A Dutch resistance fighter had reportedly cut the wires, dying in the process. The Walbrug was finally in Allied hands. It had been taken through incredible courage and at a terrible cost. The paratroopers and guardsmen had accomplished their mission, but the victory was bittersweet. The brutal fight and the delays at Nijmegen had cost too much time. At Arnhem, the bridge too far, the rescue never came.